figure it out. I was looking at that picture, and I was like, is that a Syrian? I can't, I couldn't place my finger on it. Anyway. All right, so, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Welcome back. It's the open. We have not used that one in a long time, have we?
I know.
Yeah.
That's what I'd bring it
It's the
back.
Open Please podcast. Today we have Shanna Fuld, a reporter and host of the Israel Daily News podcast, and yeah, that's all there is to it. What does your job entail, Shanna?
So my job entails taking big information and making it small and understandable and palatable. So, and that goes for every work that I've ever done and everything that I do. It might be different whether I'm writing a piece to be published or whether I'm doing something for the Israel Daily News podcast. But the Israel Daily News podcast, the idea is to take the top 5 news stories coming out of Israel Monday through Thursday and give you 5. Sometimes I skip and I do 7 because I just can't help myself. I want to give all the stories that I really think are important. So sometimes I say 5, sometimes I do 6, sometimes I do 7. The top news stories coming out of Israel every day, I'll read through all of the news and I'll read everything and then boil it down with my team into 5 concise scripts so that when I present the news, I always try to present it with as much pizzazz and personality as possible without interjecting with my opinion or trying to give a bias. And so I do that. And the idea is for people to be able to understand even the most difficult concepts and be able to come away knowing what the news is and being able to say that they understand what's going on. So that's what I do.
Very nice, very nice. I'm just wondering, in terms of bias, is it very hard to be unbiased when you're reporting on the news?
So news writing is a skill and a style. So it's not difficult for me to be non-biased because of the way that I've been trained to write. And I think what a lot of people miss in all things media is the script. They don't realize, even in reality TV, people don't realize how much the writing is behind every last piece of media. And that's very important to me. So it's all in the writing. Is it difficult to not be biased? So I'll just give you an example. I one time was asked to be a temporary anchor for a news show here in Jerusalem. And they gave me the scripts ahead of time and I was able to read them. Now, I couldn't change the stories that they chose because this was, I wasn't a regular at this news organization I was filling in. But what I could change was the words, the adjectives, the word choice. And I was able to make the story just that much more non-biased by even just removing one word from a sentence that has a opinionated connotation. And that's really important to me. So in terms of not being biased, I just rely on the excellent teachers that I had in university. I have their voices in my head. I remember what they told me. And from my newsroom training in New York, remembering to balance both sides of a story. I remember a time I submitted something and somebody came to me and said, Shanna, you could get us sued for a story like this. You didn't put the other side. You didn't even reach out for a quote. And all of this kind of training. So, and another thing about being non-biased is I think that one thing that is important to me is a lot of people today talk about news organizations having a lot of bias. And that may be true because each organization may have an agenda, but you really do need to rely on the reporter. You need to read their work. You need to read their words. I have friends at CNN. I have friends at Fox. And each of them are just doing their ultimate best to give their best reports. And the good ones, you can read it. You can read it, you can hear it, and you can experience it. And so I urge everyone to focus on the words that news reporters use.
That's
Yeah.
very interesting. Very, very interesting that you have friends that are like at opposite ends of the media spectrum with Fox and CNN. One of the things that I find that you said that is really, really relevant for our listeners is choose who you are actually reading, because the person behind the article it is worth their weight in gold. There's certain reporters that I follow, Israeli, American, British, all varying newspapers across the globe, and they're very specific ones that I like to. If I see an article of that person, I'll be like, okay, I'll definitely give that a full read and hear what's going on in Iraqi Kurdistan or whatever's actually going on. I was wondering what led you to go into this field, and especially like want to cover Israel specifically.
Well, what brought me into this field is my love for words, which I just talked so much about. So I think that makes sense. I love words. I love words so much. Words are the blood. Words are lifeline. Words are everything. And so you have to be really careful about the words that you use. And so there's my mom saves everything. My mom has this picture that I made. We each in kindergarten, we had to do a construction paper cutout of ourselves, and we put a title of what we were going to be. And mine in kindergarten said author. So I'm proud that I haven't strayed too far from the role of author. I have always loved words and writing, and I've always been good at that. And I found in my middle school, when I started getting involved with, luckily my middle school actually had a full-blown TV studio. And so at the age of 13, I got my first exposure to news and to hosting. And I had a show for the Queens, that's New York City, public access channel. And I started doing that. By the time I was in high school, I discovered that I didn't like long form. I liked short form. I like to get ideas out and I like to move on. I have great respect for authors who complete very long books because you have to be extremely disciplined, which I definitely am disciplined. But I think that there's a lot of people in the news industry will attest to this. There is such a satisfaction of getting a story out in one day. In the newsroom, if you work in a newsroom, you might start and finish a story within 40 minutes. And that's very gratifying. So I gravitated toward news because I liked being able to start and finish projects. I like poetry because I can pick up a poem and start and finish it in one sitting. And so this short form stuff is what I found to be attractive to me. And so I continued on in that journey. And by the time I was finished with high school, I had written a play, I had written poems and I had written for a magazine, and I knew that I was going into journalism because I never let my dream of being a journalist die from middle school, because I had that great hosting experience in middle school. And so I held on to that throughout high school, even though my high school was actually a mathematics school. If you know anything about the New York City public school education system, you'll know that people don't go to their zone schools. There's a lot of people that move they commute. They might commute an entire hour to go to a school that's better than the one in their neighborhood. And that was true for me. My neighborhood high school was closed. It closed down. It was so ridiculous. I received a letter in the mail telling me that was where I was going to school. And no one from any of the families that cared about education sent their kids to the local schools where I grew up. So I held on to my dream. I went to this other school that was supposedly going, a much better school. It was, but it didn't have a lot of journalism opportunity. It didn't have a lot of writing opportunity. And the focus was math and science. So I just held on to my dream. I did the artistic, creative things that I could. And then by the time it was appropriate to choose a college, everyone pointed me in the direction of SUNY Oswego because it was the state university with the broadcasting department. Famous Al Roker, the weather guy who says, let me give you the weather in your neck of the woods. That guy, he graduated from our school, put it on the map, and the rest is history.
Nice.
Can I take a little backpedal real quick? You said you had friends at Fox. Do you know Shepard Smith?
I don't have a personal relationship, no.
Oh, that sucks. I like Shep. I like Shep.
I definitely have watched, but no.
Okay. That's a shame.
One thing that, me being the British contingent here on the show, one thing that I can tell you from like the difference between British media and American media that I find is that American media is very sensationalist about headlines and about what's going on, and Fox News, it's like boom in your face, like Tucker Carlson, this is what's going on.
Well,
And
Tucker Carlson's he's not a reporter, he's an analyst or an opinion dude.
I see, but I get confused because when I turn on CNN or Fox, for example, I'm not actually getting news. I'm getting opinions of news from people. I'm not really getting like the nitty-gritty information. If I really want to know what's going on, I'll have to look at other sources to really like dig deep into an article. The way it's different in the UK is that, you have your news, which is like your news, and then separately you would have your political analyst shows like Hard Talk, I don't know if you're aware, and that kind of stuff, and debates on Sunday, which I think is something that is kind of needed here, because at the moment we only really have Eyal Berkovich and Ophira on Friday nights broadcasting to the nation and everyone's watching that. We don't really have like a show that would plug everyone in as we do in the UK on Sundays, question time and stuff like that. I definitely think we could benefit from better discourse here. I don't know how you feel about the Israeli news, Shana, but I obviously view all the main channels, Khan, 12, 13, and sometimes I'll go in and I'll have a look and it's just shouting across the table and not much is, being said, and I'll switch off. I'll switch off because it's like it's not like a culture debate. It's not, it's people literally shouting over each other. And I think, we kind of need to sort that out over here. I don't know what your feelings are on it.
So the journalist in me needed to comment that Shep Smith, by the way, moved from Fox News to have his own show. And so that was a little bit also of a scandal because he had a meltdown about information and content that was being put forward, and he removed himself. So I wanted to say that even after years and years, actually for his case, upwards of 2 decades of working at an organization, that journalistic integrity doesn't go away. And we all get into journalism for the purpose of spreading information and informing people. And journalism is such a difficult industry that I don't believe it's possible that anyone could last for 23 years at a station, or to have even to last more than 5 years as a journalist without having this insane desire to work in the field, because it's cutthroat. The pay is terrible and people are negative and nasty to you. So you got to really be passionate about what you're doing. In terms of Israeli content and Israeli news, I have great respect for Israeli journalists. I think that Israeli journalists go through extreme lengths to get information. And there have been so many journalists in the past year that have been let go from their roles in stations across the country because they uncovered things that government officials didn't want to be aired. And there are a number of journalists around the country right now who are out of work because they did their job, because they did their best. And that's very painful for me. In terms of shouting over one another, I certainly don't think that's the best way. I have worked at TV stations where you have two people shouting over one another, and the anchor or the host really needs to get in there and take control and put a pause on that type of discourse from a media perspective, because we can't hear what they're saying, and it's really difficult and distracting. Definitely in the United States, you have an array of different types of media. You could watch Face the Nation on Sundays. You could watch a show that I used to work on in New York City called In Focus, which is a full-blown Sunday magazine style show just about New York City politicians and New York City diplomacy. So that is really cool. In Israel, my Hebrew is not good enough to watch the equivalent of a Face the Nation. And I think that that's why I started the Israel Daily News podcast, because I wanted to do my best in the capacity that I can, both for myself so that I could continue to do journalism in the place that I love and the place that I want to live, and so that I could get the news to people, especially young people who don't have cable. They're not even watching, even Israelis, they're not watching the Khan, or they're not watching Reshets. They're not watching these institutions because people don't have cable anymore. Many people are. Many people are. But I think a lot of my listeners are what are we? We're the millennials, we're the Gen Z, and these are the people that are listening to my show, and people who don't have strong enough Hebrew are listening to my show. And I don't do as much political discourse as what you're talking about. I do a lot of straight news, and then when I want to do political discourse, I invite one analyst at a time to come on the show. I never have debates. What I'll do is I'll have someone from the left come on the show on a Wednesday, and then I'll have someone from the right come on the show on a Thursday, so that each person has their time to listen to each side, and that they're not in the same show.
Yeah, that's a very smart way. Way of doing things.
If I could interject with something, do you think there needs to be more of a, I don't know, education amongst the general populace that analysts aren't supposed to be your news source? Like, that's supposed to be the reporter, you know, because I feel like people look at like Rachel Maddow, they look at Tucker Carlson, and they think like that's the news. No, like those are analysts, you know. Meanwhile, you have people like Chris Wallace or Shepard Smith who are out there actually just giving you the news. This is what's going on, and they get ignored. People focus on the political pundits rather than the actual reporter.
I think that people need to know how to read, and they need to know how to think for themselves. And I don't think that this is a new issue. I think this is an issue that has existed forever. And I think that what we need to do more of is encourage people to think for themselves and not to be sheep. And that's my pet peeve. I don't surround myself with people that go with the crowd. I like to surround myself with people that think for themselves, take everything with a grain of salt. And I can't stress enough reading and being informed and having discourse and having an open mind. Of course, you can only have an open mind if your parents had an open mind, or the people around you had an open mind, or somebody in your life interjected and taught you what it means to have an open mind. So that's really important. For the political analysts that you're talking about, this is really interesting. So I don't know that I see Rachel Maddow as an analyst. I think that Rachel Maddow tells the news as she sees it in a monologue form. But I think that people watching her show, for the most part, recognize that she is left. And they know that. and they come to her for that, and they're happy with that.
Yeah,
Mm.
of course. No, I was just thinking that because I don't know. I guess I'm trying to be fair that there are people who analyze the news through their right or left wing spectrum, and I was just trying to give a left and a right wing example because we all know Rachel Maddow is left leaning, and yeah, I was just trying to give a good, I don't know, balanced example there.
Sure, I understand what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that there should be a difference between hard news and monologue style shows like Rachel Maddow that come on a little bit later. And there is a difference, and that's why, and there is a difference. That's why there's the NPR of the world, or the Israel Daily News podcast of the world, where you come and you just get informed, and then you walk away. But I do think that okay, so let's get down into that question. The issue, I think, is not actually these analysts. I think the issue are influencers on social media who don't have journalism backgrounds, don't have political backgrounds, don't know anything more than what they're seeing in their news feed on Instagram and on Facebook, and are influenced by a small circle of people. These are the dangerous people, I believe, because I think that people who sit down to watch Rachel Maddow or to watch, the equivalent on a right-wing show, the people who sit down for that, they do this with intention, and they're following these people, and they know that it's left, and they want to hear that stuff. The scary part are the young people that are becoming that are getting impressions by influencers. For example, Gigi Hadid, who had so much to say about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict recently. She is not a journalist. She is not a seasoned politician. She has not read the history of Israel, the history of Palestine. She does not know who the political players in the Palestinian Authority are by first and last name when they came into office. She does not know those things. And those are the people that we really need to worry about, because those are the people that are influencing people who don't come and sit down and watch a special program and they know what they're getting into. This is coming to them on their social media.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, Shana. And an example of this, not exactly, but it's a little bit different because this is an American politician. But I can remember seeing a clip of AOC a few years back, and she couldn't tell the difference between Gaza and the West Bank. And here she is, supposed to be an expert on the Middle East, and she's gonna. And to me, as somebody who's from here, who lives here, who served, I find the amount of absurdity and the amount of misinformation and lies that spread specifically about my homeland is on a whole nother level. And I can actually tell you, I happen to be in contact with a few people and hear all sorts of things. Now, the recent conflict that happened, Shomer Chomot, on the Palestinian side, they were told that the flag marchers were going to go through Bab el Amud into El Aqsa and burn down El Aqsa, which is obviously a complete and utter fabrication of the truth. Yet you have a large majority of the Palestinian people believing something like this over the reality of what was meant to happen on the ground. And I'm at a bit of a loss of how we close this gap, because so many people just don't want to hear the other side. They don't want to listen. They're not willing. They're sure that they're right about everything. And the same goes for Israelis, by the way, with regards to many issues that we have in the country. Certain people are just not willing to hear. We have the best country. We have the best army. We have well, okay, do we though? Let's look at the facts. Let's look at what's going on. Let's look at what, so I definitely think we're in very, very tricky water when it comes to social media, when it comes to influencers, and then when it comes to misinformation and lies. And one thing you said, Shana, with regards to it wasn't invented today or yesterday. you're 100% right. We had Rabbi Eli Abadi on the show, and he told us that when he was living in Lebanon in 1967, the fake news was already around. They were being told that Israel had been wiped off the map and that it was finished, and obviously complete fabrications. So my question to you is, what can our listeners do, and what can people out there in general do to be more aware of what is actually going on, and who they should be listening to, and who they should maybe, like Gigi Hadid and stuff, maybe less, maybe just admire the beauty if you're into that, or whatever it is, fashion, I don't know.
So the thing that I think is the first and foremost important is child rearing, parenting. I think that you can't have a nation of peace seekers when you come from a hateful home. And that is a really big part of this information section. So if you believe in the better side of humanity, if you don't have reason to hate, if you haven't heard hateful things at your dinner table, when you hear news that might sound negative, you might take a moment and say, well, that doesn't sound right. That's impossible that every Arab hates Jews with all of their heart and wishes that we die, because you come from a level-headed, open home in which your parents didn't say things like that. And so when you hear a fake news story, you might take a second and think about if that sounds right. I think that's the most important thing. People need to have tools, and with those tools, they can access the world and they can be in the world. Without having any of these tools, I think therapy is important. I think people need to learn how to use their brains. I don't think enough people learn how to use their brains. Not enough people. A lot of people are going to the gym, but they're not going to the gym for the brain, and they're not getting information, sitting with the information, thinking about the information. Even a basic therapy trick that I learned in high school, which I thought everybody knows how to use, but it doesn't seem that way as an adult, is sometimes you have a feeling, and sometimes I'll be walking down the street and I feel sad. And I'll talk to myself, okay, Shanna, why do you feel sad? Then I'll think about it for a minute. Oh, it was because this person said this to me. Okay, now let's analyze what that person said. Now you're at the second part. Okay, this person told me that I'm ugly. I just made that up. This person told me that I'm ugly. How does that make me feel? Now I think about it. Okay, this person told me that I feel ugly. It made me feel upset because I'm not feeling pretty today, because this. And then you ask yourself, you get to the end part, is that true? And then you think about that. You say, no, that's not true. And then you go again, am I going to let this bother me? No. And then you that all happens inside of your brain. You work through that. That's a tool that you need when you see information. So you see information, you read it, you think about it, you consider it, you go to the next step. I'm going to check this with another news source. I'm going to think about if I really believe this. I'm going to remember my Arab neighbor who was my best friend, and I'm not going to allow this news article that says that all the Arabs want to kill us. You go through these motions. And if you don't know how to do that, that's your first problem. That's number one. That's a big issue for everything. The second part is I encourage people to go to news sources like NPR, PBS, public broadcasting in the United States, and even sadly, the New York Times has a lot of loaded words. I actually did a newsletter. I do a weekly newsletter. It comes out on Sunday evenings. Or Monday morning, depending on where you are in the world. And I took a New York Times article. I love the New York Times, by the way. I devour it. I read it weekly. But there are issues with it. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in it. There's a lot of problems with it. Even me as a journalist who I believe in journalistic ethics, I still love to read the New York Times, even though I see the flaws. So I did in this newsletter, I took some of the content of a news article and I literally highlighted, copied and pasted and put into a chart the words in the news article that I thought had a connotation to it that wasn't black or white, that was biased, that had an opinion within that word. And I highlighted the words and I sent out to my listeners, to my readers, these are the words that makes this article biased. And I said, you could have said this without this word. You could have, there was a line in there about Avira Mengistu, who was an Ethiopian Israeli who wandered into Gaza. He was mentally ill. And the phrasing from the New York Times was, Israeli citizen marched himself into Gaza.
It's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's horrific to say something like that.
You don't use that. You don't use the phrase marched himself when you're referring to somebody who's mentally ill. A mentally ill person doesn't march himself anywhere. And so I highlighted that. So you need to, as news consumers, you need to be aware of this language, and you need to try to find reporters and news organizations that are using neutral wording.
Well, this is one thing I wanted to get into because I really do devour the news as well, but kind of more of all over the globe. I'll read from this newspaper, this country, and bounce around a bit. And one thing I find from like UK publications like The Guardian and BBC is their headlines can be the most misleading things there are in the entire world. You can have like something I saw on The Guardian was Palestinian killed by security forces. It doesn't tell you which security forces, and it doesn't tell you what's going on. And this was the case of Nizar Banat, may he rest in peace, who was killed by Palestinian security forces. So somebody just that is already anti-Israel sees that, doesn't even click the article and read what's going on, and thinks, okay, this is what's they've gone and killed another innocent Palestinian, and the cycle continues. Is there any way we can lobby these organizations to not be misleading or somehow, because it's to the point where it's done purposefully, you know?
It's definitely done to get clicks.
Yeah.
It's done to get people to open. It's done, and I know the game, and I know the business, and I know also word count. You might in a print news edition have only a certain number of words that you can use for a headline, and maybe I'm not defending, but you could say that someone said security forces instead of PA security forces or Palestinian security forces because the editor didn't want to use the word Palestinian twice in the headline, or they didn't have enough space to add in that word. Nevertheless, it is irresponsible. And I think that what we need to have more diversity in newsrooms so that somebody could stand up and say, this is bad, this is wrong. Even for brands, you need to have a diverse group, because there have been so many brands that got themselves into hot water because they didn't have somebody in the room saying, this is racist, this is anti-Semitic, don't do this, you don't want to do this. In terms of lobbying, I think the most effective thing is to have people write in. People need to take some agency. When you see something in the New York Times, you need to send a letter to the editor and say, hi, this is Shanna Fuld from Queens, New York, and I think that you're using words that are anti-Semitic. I think you're using words that are leaning, and I think that you'd be surprised the power that the individual has. So I think each individual needs to take out a couple seconds from their day to write in or to post or inform. And I think that it's always been like this, and it's always going to be like this, that people want you to listen to their thing. So you got to be a little wise.
For sure. It's like streetwise, but it's not street. It's media and online internet wise, I guess. It's a whole new kind of realm that we've developed. And what I'm thinking is maybe schools and maybe education and educators need to be somehow focused on this and how we use these tools that we have. And because I feel like the internet came along, it was kind of in its infancy when I was young, and then at some point the tech got good and it just took over. And most of people's time now is spent online, and less outdoors. And it seems like this is the way we're going, whether we like it or not. Food turns up at your door, just ordering off a phone. So obviously it's brought amazing things, and it's connected people from across the globe in a way that has never been done before. Do you think there's maybe like an adjustment period where humans are going to like adjust to what is going on, and somehow we'll eventually, we'll settle down with the tech, and we'll settle down with the whole left-right arguments and clickbait and, all the kind of madness that's going on?
We've been having left-right arguments since we invented those terms. Like, humans have always been political creatures, and we've always had disagreements and arguments. I don't think we're ever going to get past that. I think we're going to go through phases of where it dies down in a fanaticism.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the fanaticism of it and the radicalization of it. I mean, you've seen political attacks left and right in America. You've seen things going on in the UK. It's kind of worldwide. It's spreading worldwide. My question is, how can we dull it down a bit, or will time just in its essence bring it down?
So it's funny that you would say to adjust, because that's something that I have actually been saying a lot when people complain about the technology and the addiction to the phone. So I always try to be rational and I don't like alarmist. I don't like doing anything alarmist. And so I think a lot of people have taken this alarmist approach to technology. And this is what I think. I think there's going to be an adjustment. We've only had these shiny new toys for 10 years, I would say. I mean, there were phones and beepers and pagers, but let's talk about the iPhone and the Android. The smartphones have only been in existence for about a decade, and we're just humans. So I think that it takes time to adjust, and I think that we will adjust. I do think that there will continue to be advancements and more technology, and but certainly we're going to figure things out. People are already finding ways to get off of their phone or to limit their time on the phone. I think it's just a matter of time before people bring a level of balance into their lives. I like to use this example a lot because this is kind of my motto about everything in moderation and no alarmist and don't get worked up and everything's going to be fine. This is me. One thing that I really like to remind people is the pandemonium and chaos that ensued when the printing press was created and when religious leaders found their communities reading books that were not religious materials. And today, no one would think twice about reading Hemingway or reading a book by a contemporary artist. We would give you a pat on the back. If you read 30 books, if you read one book a week, I mean, there are competitions for this in school. How many books can the kids read? And there was a time in history where people were burning books and parents were taking away books from their kids, and it was terrible. And now we just see how enriching books can be for us. So I think we just need to remember that experience and that moment in history. Every time something new comes up that the older generation is scared of, we need to remember that at one time reading any book that wasn't the Bible was a sin.
Yeah. Like, can I ask there's some questions in the comments one of our listeners wants to ask you, Shanna. Amir, can you bring it up? Because I can't do that right now.
Yeah, that's true. I can just read it out there. It's right in front of me. One of our listeners wants to know, Shana, are you always able to report the facts on the ground as much as you see them? And are there any vested interests at your publication?
So the beauty of the Israel Daily News podcast is that I am supported by my listeners. The money that I get for the podcast comes from people who really respect my work and want to see it continue and want to see my team grow. And I've detailed my vision of what the Israel Daily News is going to look like in some time, and how I want to employ people to work in a beautiful, wholesome, encouraging, creative work environment, and how I want to create a news studio in Israel, and I want to take this show from audio to visual, and I have such a vision for this show. And people who believe in my vision are sending me $5 a month, $10 a month, and slowly but surely over time, I have been able to accrue some paid subscribers. And I'm just hoping that the longer I go, the more financially stable the Israel Daily News podcast will be. And so the beauty of that is that I don't have any vested interests. I don't have anyone telling me what to do or who to publish. Sure, sometimes people send me things or they ask me, have you seen this? Are you going to cover this? But there is no Bibi Netanyahu at the top telling me what to do.
Yeah.
There is nobody, and there is nobody that tells me what news to report, and that is the beauty of it. So do I have any vested interest? My vested interest is to give people an overview of what's going on so that when they go about their day, they are equipped. In my show, I say knowledge is the best weapon, because when you know something, nobody can take anything away from you. When you know something as a truth, when you sit down on a Friday night dinner and people are having a political discussion and it's going to an ugly place, and you know the facts or you've been following the news stories, nobody can argue with you because you have the facts. So are you always able to report the facts on the ground as much as you see them? I report whatever I see. So what I do in my process is I go through all of the news every day. I go through all of the news in the morning. I wake up, I go to sleep, I'm reading the news, and I'm a journalist, so I also have my sources. I have my people in Ramallah. I have my people in the north and the south and the east and the west. I have my people that when I see a news story being reported, if that doesn't smell right to me, I know who to call. I know who to call and do a quick call. Hi, I saw this detail, didn't sound right. Can you confirm? There was a story that was happening in the West Bank. It sounded totally ridiculous. I called up a friend who lived in the neighborhood. It wasn't even a friend. It was a friend of a friend. I called this person up. I said, I need you to tell me what you've been seeing in your neighborhood because this doesn't sound right. So what you have to do is and I do a mixture of doing a highlight of all of the general news that I see. And then I also add in news stories and experiences from my own life. I'm going to give you a quick example. There was a story that came up this past week about young Palestinian children who are being taken into the northern Israel areas, brought to intersections, and forced, extorted to sell toys and to sell items to people driving by in cars. Okay, so I saw this as a news story. I actually witnessed it a couple days previously. I had been driving in the north. I was between Nahariya and Ma'alot, and I was driving a car, and there were children in the street offering toys, and one of them ran out in front of my car just as the light was turning green, and I was nervous, and I said to myself, oh my God, that could have been a nightmare. I could have ran that kid over. And in an article that came out just two days later, unfortunately, it reported the death of a young boy, 8 years old, who died from that in one of those intersections. So what I did was I took the facts from that report that I read. I mentioned the news source where I saw it. And then I also added my anecdote to say, actually, this is correct. I saw it with my own eyes. This is what I saw. And if there are facts in a report that I don't think are right, I will say that it reportedly, allegedly, I never report something as facts unless I know that it's a fact because I saw it.
All right. I mean, that seems to be the only healthy way to go about it. Let me
Yeah,
ask, 'cause
sorry,
I
Joe.
want to. Oh, you were talking. I couldn't hear you. My bad. That was
No,
some
no, go
connection
ahead.
issues.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. I was just going to ask about what are the difficulties you personally have when it comes to reporting on the conflict? Like, is there any hate mail, I guess you could say? Because we've gotten some, and we're just trying to talk to people. But I'm just wondering, like, what kind of, like, have you gotten any threats, any kind of hate mail? I don't know, from either Jews or Palestinians, whatever they might be.
I've definitely gotten hate mail. I've gotten people have used words to attack my womanhood. Terrible things have been said to me sexually and about what I'm doing, but those are trolls on the internet. No truly intelligent person who's really reading and studying has said something so terrible to me. And the interesting thing is that I have had a few people come at me with daggers, in a metaphoric way on Instagram.
Oh, okay. All right.
Not in on Instagram,
Yeah.
people will come throwing daggers like right from the start, like, no, hello, can we talk about this? Like, people will say, how could you be this? How could you be a Zionist? And I always find a way through language to disarm them. And I'll say, don't you realize that there's a person behind the Israel Daily News podcast? That's me. And I'll say sometimes, I would like to take a moment and say, hello, my name is Shanna Fuld. Sometimes I'll say, instead of responding, I'll say, hi, my name is Shanna Fuld. What's your name? Let's start this conversation over. And when I do that, sometimes people actually really respect that and drop their negativity, and they will then introduce themselves to me, tell me where they're from. And sometimes they'll say, I'm sorry for the way that I approached you. I shouldn't have approached you like that. And I've had a lot of interactions like that by me coming back in a professional way. Just this week, I received a lot of tense notifications and like messages from people about the Rudy Rochman story. And I had reported what I knew about it. I didn't report anything controversial. I didn't, whatever. And I received a lot of messages about it. And I said to this person, I said, you do realize that you are pooping on me, and that what I do is dedicate my life to telling stories. I said, you do realize that I wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night and live, breathe, and eat this. And this is what I do, and this is my passion, and this is my love. And you are going to tell me that I'm poop? How could you say that to me? And the person really apologized and said, I'm so sorry, you're right. Like, this is a really hard industry to be in, so sometimes you just have to level with people.
For sure. You do have to level with people. The issue that I have that I can't really understand, maybe I just don't have, it's not in my nature, but what do people get from being hateful online? Like, what do you actually gain from typing to someone, you are this or that? Or I really don't see the point of it. Like, we went through this, I don't know if you're aware, but in the Euro finals, England got to the final against Italy, and 3 of our players missed penalties in the end of the game, and the abuse they got was out of this world.
That's that whole match between England and Italy is what spawned that article that we were talking about before we recorded. The title of the article was, "Why Does Nobody Like the English Overseas?" It was an article on CNN, and it was all about the behavior of soccer hooligans from England and overseas about this whole Italy versus England match.
Well, the joke is, right? We want to host in 2030 the World Cup, and we got big plans and all this, but now we've screwed it up because we just trashed our own we didn't win, and then we trashed the area, and it's just a big mess. And to be honest, football for me, it's one of the most, like journalism is for you, Shana, football is for me. Like it's my passion, it's my love. It brings people together. It's the best sport in the world. I don't care what anyone says. You just need a ball to play. You don't need anything else. You can play on grass, concrete. You just need a ball and you can play. Other sports aren't as inclusive as football. And if you do go around the world, it unites people straight away. If you're in another country, the first person something says to you when you're British is, "Oh, what football team? Oh, you support? Oh, yeah, Messi. Oh, this, that, Ronaldo," and boom, you've made an instant friend. So maybe.
I like how we derailed the whole conversation with soccer.
Yeah, we've derailed it. I'm gonna bring it back. Because,
all right.
Because I see social media as an overall benefit for society as opposed to a drawback. And I think that we need to learn how to connect on a more, shall I say, more regular kind of basis, like it was in real life. So what I've seen during the COVID is that a lot of content creators online have started creating content because a lot of people were very thirsty for it. And from that, it's grown into building huge communities. And it's something that I guess is still in its infancy. But people's viewing habits are changing. You touched on it a little bit earlier, from, your mainstream Khan, Reshet, Schlossre, and going over to, podcasts like yourself, like the Israeli Daily News podcast. And do you think that this trend will continue and hopefully reduce the amount of hate? Because people see that it's not some big organization behind it. It's Shanna Fuld. Look, I'm right here. Hello. It's a real person. It's not some big BBC, corporation that is pumped with taxpayers' money.
I do think that that's the trend. I know that that's the trend. People are looking for reliable sources. And in addition to that, I think that what makes the Rachel Maddows of the world, who are still doing traditional forms of news with traditional stations, I don't mean traditional forms of news because she's not traditional, but she's backed by a major organization with money. Why is her show successful? Why do people love her? People want to connect. They want to feel that they know the person, and they want personality, and they want an experience. People want an experience. So people come to the Israel Daily News podcast and they have an experience. I take them on a ride. They have an experience with me, and they, just by me dropping in a little bit about what's going on, maybe a little bit about what's going on in my life, they feel connected to me. They can trust me. They know me. And I do think that's going to lead to a different type of journalism and a different type of news consumption and content consumption. And that is good because it gives people some flexibility, but it's not easy. It is not easy to be able to do that. I work very hard. I do many different things. I write a lot of scripts. I am a researcher. I do a lot of things to keep it moving. And so it's being an entrepreneur. Doing what I'm doing, you need to be an entrepreneur. And this past year, I started the podcast in June of 2020. So it's already a year old. And yeah, thanks. So when I started, thank you. It's a really big, it's a big accomplishment.
Definitely.
But it forced me to become an entrepreneur. It forced me to be a businesswoman. It forced me to wear many hats. I have to have marketing, and it's just like starting up a business. You need to have your head in every different segment. So this is really difficult to accomplish. And I think, is it going to bring less hate? I don't think it's going to bring less hate. I think that the only thing that could bring less hate are less hateful parents. I think so long as you have people sending out terrible messaging or talking negatively about your neighbors, there's not going to be any less hate. I think people also don't respect and understand how much effort goes into making your own content on social media. I think people see TikTok stars and think that they have the easiest lives. And let me tell you something, I'm sure that they don't. Doing 2 minutes of content could take more than 2 days. It could take 2 weeks. And people just don't know what goes into quality content. And I think that people need to respect each other's industries.
Yeah,
I fully agree with that, Shauna. Just before we do get off there, we've got a few questions here in the chat from our viewers.
Yeah.
I'd love to get into a few of them. I saw some really interesting ones.
Yeah, you know what? Hold on. How about Shanna? Since we're coming up on the end of it, how about you pick the last few questions from our audience to answer?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
so
you can go for it.
I'm going to go through a few of them quickly.
Sure.
So we have here a question from Adib. What is the connection between poverty and unrest in the Arab communities? How does that lead to violence? So poverty leads to violence everywhere, in every community, anywhere in the whole world. And one thing that the Israeli government is trying to deal with, and it's really hard because there are two different cultures here, and this is a story that really gets me a little bit worked up, is the Israeli government trying to intervene in Arab crime family activity, which is really big throughout Israel in different Arab communities. And what really breaks my heart is the good seeds that get caught up in the crossfires. Literally, there was a teacher. There was a story. I don't know if you guys remember this. It may have been, there was
in Lud when a teacher was shot.
Our friend Adib, whose question you just read, he was on the show. He was telling us about that.
Yeah, Adib,
so
this is a tragedy.
Yeah,
this is a serious tragedy. This teacher, who was such a joy and light to students from different backgrounds, she was unfortunately shot while hanging out laundry, and she was caught in the crossfires of this crime, of some warring crime families. So that's something that the Israeli government is working on. Is it the responsibility of the Israeli government? I mean, it's the responsibility of our governments to protect our citizens, but certainly poverty and unrest leads to violence. And so what we need is more education. I'm going to move on to, what is your vision for peace? I liked that question because no one's ever asked me that question before, because I'm a journalist. This is my vision for peace. My vision for peace is the Israelis and the Palestinians coming together, and everyone is forced to meet each other. Okay? Everyone is forced to meet each other, and we all have to tell each other that we love each other, and that we want the other person there. So you have to, in my vision, you have to sit down at a desk, one person on each side of the desk, and each person would take turns telling the other person that they want them to be their neighbor and that they don't want them to leave. So you would have to look into that person's eyes and you would have to say, I want you to be my neighbor and I don't want you to leave. And that's the beginning of my vision for peace, because I think that each of us feels that the other one doesn't want us to exist and doesn't want us to live in the same place. And so that's my vision for peace.
Do you know what, Shana? You really can condense things into. You've mastered it, because I looked at that question and I was like, "We're gonna do a whole nother episode on that." That's a whole nother. But you managed to nail it brilliantly. So fantastic on that. And I think as a solution, I think that can definitely be part of it. As a holistic way of getting people to realize that yes, we are neighbors. Yes, we have a traumatic past, but what family doesn't have a traumatic past, eh?
Yeah.
Who doesn't have a bit of, trouble in their family history? And at the end of the day, like I've been told many times, I've been told that we're wrong. We're not cousins, because Yitzhak and Ishmael were brothers. So I've been told by certain people, we're not cousins, we're brothers. So, it definitely is time to step away from old narratives and try and build something new out here in the Holy Land. And as for tonight, Shanna, really, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on our show. I was really, really looking forward to this one for a while. So yeah, thank you so much, and you're obviously welcome back anytime you'd like. And yeah, Tom Kal ואחרי הצום שיהיה שבוע טוב.
תודה רבה, שבוע tov. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me in mind. Thank you for letting me take some questions at the end. And I would just like to welcome, there were some questions that I didn't get to answer. I would be so happy for you to send me a DM on Instagram at Shanna Fuld. My name has 2 N's in it, and I'm very sensitive about that.
Yeah.
SHANNAFULD. You can find me.
I get that. I get
Instagram.
that. People misspell my name all the time. There's 2 R's, people.
Jared with 2 R's. So whoever would like to get in touch with me, please reach out to me at Shanna Fuld. And you can also reach out at the israeldaily.news, which is our Instagram support for the podcast. And the podcast can be heard on Google, Apple, anywhere that you can hear podcasts. You can hear my show. It's the Israel Daily News Podcast. We broadcast Monday through Thursday, and I would love the support, and I would love for you all to tell your friends about it, because the more listeners we have, the better job we can do at bringing this into a full-blown news studio with vision in Israel. Yes. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, 100%. And just to add before we go, definitely, guys, if you're not aware, make yourselves aware. Sharing our podcast and Shanna's podcast out there to your friends, to your family, to people that you think will enjoy our content, will like what they're seeing, will get the fresh, up-to-date views on what's going on. Please do share it out there. It really does help us spread the word. And thank you all so much for being with us. I'm wishing everybody a fantastic week for those who aren't fasting, and an easy fast for those that are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Amir, you better not be stealing my ending. I'm the one who closes this show. I hope you know.
Oh, I'm well aware, mate. I'm well aware.
You better be. But before I go, I want to bring up a question to the audience. Whose vision for peace is better, Shanna's plan or my plan of giving every person a Choco Lab and mandating they have to have them with them at all times? You can't be angry if you have a Choco Labrador puppy just hanging out with you. And that, by the way, that's not 1 puppy per household. That's 1 puppy per person. You have 5 people in your house, you got 5 puppies.
There's enough dog poop in Tel Aviv at the moment, mate. It's not part of the plan. No.
Yeah,
I'll stick with
so might as well spread it to the rest of the country. But you know what? I'll leave that for everyone else to decide. Because for now, it's time to go.